Hi, class. Sorry I can't be with you today. We are still going to be taking notes through this video link today so that your class doesn't fall behind. And we're also going to finish up 87 today. First thing you need to do is answer your question of the day. What is the difference between a dominant trait and a recessive trait is your first question. Your second question is what must be the genotype for a recessive trait? And your third question is what are the two genotypes for a dominant trait? I'll give you a minute or so to answer those questions in your question of the day, and then we will go over the answers through this video. You have about 30 more seconds to wrap up your answer to your question of the day. Okay, let's go over the answer to the question of the day today. The first question was, what is the difference between a dominant trait and a recessive trait? The difference is that a dominant trait can block out a recessive trait. We saw that in yesterday's notes, how purple flowers blocked out white flowers. The purple was dominant and the white was recessive. The second question was, what must the genotype be for a recessive trait? The genotype must be two lowercase letters, for example, lowercase a. In order for a recessive trait to be seen, it must have both recessive alleles. The third question was, what are the two possible genotypes for a dominant trait? That could either be homozygous dominant, two uppercase A's, or it could be heterozygous, one dominant and one recessive. A dominant trait can either have two dominant alleles or one dominant allele that blocks out a recessive allele. Please make sure you have your answer to the question of the day for all three parts. Then please get out your notes packet. We are going to be taking notes on the second page, front and back. As you are taking these notes with the class, be sure to write in your answers like you normally would if I was in the classroom. Go ahead and take a minute to get out your notes packet and a writing utensil or to borrow one from up front, and then we'll get started. If you haven't already, please get out your notes packet and your writing utensil. Okay, let's start into our notes. So you should be on the top of page 2. You have this flow chart where you should be filling in the correct terms. We've heard two of these words before, specifically chromosome and gene, and we're going to learn a new word, allele. So the first word is chromosome. Like we know, chromosomes are made of DNA, and chromosomes contain the genes for hundreds of different traits. So in the bottom picture, we have an example of what a chromosome looks like. This one chromosome has the genes for different traits of pea plants. So for example, This one chromosome could have the gene for flower color, for flower size, seed shape, and hundreds of other traits. The second word over is a gene. A gene is a chromosome that has genetic information for one specific trait. So again, a gene is a section on a chromosome that has the genetic information for one specific trait. Looking at the image, notice how I circled just one part of the chromosome. That one part of the chromosome has the gene for specifically flower color. The last word to look at is allele. An allele is a different versions of a gene. So it could be dominant or it could be recessive. One gene is made of two different alleles. In the last picture, we can see the meaning of that word allele. So previously we circled gene for flower color. Now there's one allele on one part of the chromosome that codes for flower color. There's a second allele across from that one that also codes for flower color. Those alleles could be dominant and recessive. They could be dominant and dominant. They could be recessive and recessive. There are different combinations of alleles that make up a gene. Alleles for the same gene will be represented by the same letter. So this allele we could represent with A and A. But if I was circling the gene for maybe flower size, which is on a different part of the chromosome, I would use different letters such as B or C or D, really whichever letters you want to choose. Moving on down our page, some other key vocab words. Homozygous versus heterozygous. Homozygous means two alleles of the gene are the exact same. We've seen the prefix homo before. Homo means same. So homozygous, the alleles are the same. This could either be two recessive alleles, known as homozygous recessive, or it could be two dominant alleles, known as homozygous dominant. The opposite word from this is heterozygous. Heterozygous means two alleles of the gene are different. There's one dominant allele and there's one recessive allele, aka a hybrid. So heterozygous and hybrid are synonyms of each other that mean the same thing, whereas homozygous means two alleles of the gene are the same, and heterozygous means two alleles of the gene are different. We'll be using these vocab words a lot, so just remember the prefix homo means same, hetero means different, and that will help you out a lot. The last two big vocab words that we'll be seeing a lot are phenotype and genotype. Phenotype refers to how a trait appears or is expressed. So phenotype is the physical appearance of something. The easiest way for me to remember that is that pH, phenotype, stands for physical appearance, pH. An example of that is a true round seed. So that's what I see with my eyes. That's the physical appearance, or the phenotype is true round seed. The opposite word is genotype. The genotype is the two alleles that control the phenotype. The genotype decides the phenotype. The genotype trick stands for genetic makeup. GE and GE, genotype is the genetic makeup. An example of that can be seen in the bottom, capital R, capital R. There are two dominant alleles in this genotype. The genotype will always, always, always be two letters long, and the letter combination can be dominant, dominant, dominant recessive, or recessive, recessive. We are now moving on to how to predict the likelihood of a trait being passed on from parent to offspring. So a Punnett square is a tool that we can use in here to predict how likely it is that a trait will be passed on. To the right, you can see an example of a Punnett square. And in the following slides, we are going to learn how to create and interpret a Punnett square. Moving on to the steps to drawing a Punnett square. These are printed in your packet, so you should see them right there for you. And we're going to go through the steps in order and then create a Punnett square example with it. So the first step is to make a neat and organized box. This will actually be given to you whenever we do these in a doc. But if you were given a piece of paper version, you just make a nice little box of 4. Second, you determine the genotypes of the parents. So you determine these are the 2 letters of each parent. Third, list the male alleles on top. So in these blue boxes, I would list the male alleles separately. Step 4, list the female alleles on the left. So in these pink boxes, I'm going to list the female alleles separately. Fifth, I will match the alleles in the boxes. I'll write all the female alleles in all the boxes to the right, and then write all the male alleles in the boxes below. Whenever we're writing out genotypes, we always want to list the dominant alleles or the capital letters first. So we want to list the dominant, bigger, stronger, taller one before we write the recessive lowercase one. The last step is to double check all your work. There should be 2 alleles in each of the 4 boxes with all of the capital letters listed first. So here's an example that we are going to try out. The example says cross a male who's heterozygous with a female who's homozygous dominant. It's given me the genotypes. So far I have done steps 1 and 2 just from reading the question. Moving on to step 3, I'm going to list the male alleles inside the blue boxes on top of the Punnett square. So I'm going to separate this capital A from this lowercase a and write them in the boxes. I have now done that. Notice how I have completed step 3. I'm going to complete step 4 next. So here's the female genotype, homozygous dominant. I'm going to split those into these pink boxes here. I split them. Got my capital letters and my capital letters in the female boxes. Moving on to step 5, match the alleles into the boxes. Write the female alleles in all the boxes to the right, and write the male alleles in all the boxes below. So to complete this first box on my Punnett square, I look at what's on the top and what's to the left of it. Write both those letters inside the box. For my next box over, look at what's on top, what's to the left, write those 2 letters inside the box. I get heterozygous for this one. I'll then look at what's in the top and what's to the left for this bottom left box, and I get that. I look at what's on the top, what's on the left, match it here. The final step is to double check my work. There should be 2 alleles in each of the 4 boxes, which there are. I noticed there's 2, 2, 2, 2, and all capital letters should be listed first. I succeeded in that in the boxes over here by listing the dominant allele first. That is your first example. Let's go ahead and now try out a different example. So here are my steps again. This question is leveling up just a little bit because it's telling me not the genotype exactly, but it's giving it to me in words. So this example says cross a homozygous recessive white flower with a heterozygous purple flower. I first need to do step 2, determine the genotypes of the parent. Since this example is saying a homozygous recessive white flower, that tells me that the male is going to have 2 recessive alleles represented as 2 lowercase letters. And I put those into the male boxes. I'm going to cross that with the heterozygous purple flower. Hetero means different. There's going to be 2 different alleles with 1 dominant and 1 recessive. I put those into the female boxes. I'm then going to follow the matching pattern of looking at what's on the left, what's on the top, writing those 2 alleles inside the black box. So I complete my cross, and I should have this. I got that by, again, looking at what's on the left, what's on the top, match them. I can then double check my work. There are 2 alleles, sorry about that random noise, in each of the 4 boxes with all the capital letters listed first. And that's your Punnett square. With this Punnett square, I can now make some predictions using what I see. So notice how I have 4 black boxes. I'm going to look at those 4 black boxes to answer questions about what's the probability of different things being passed on. There are 3 questions on this page. What's the probability of homozygous dominant? What's the probability of heterozygous? What's the probability of homozygous recessive offspring? Go ahead and turn to your group for the next 2 minutes and determine the probabilities of each of these questions based on what's seen inside the Punnett square. Again, turn to your group, answer these 3 questions, and we'll check our answers in about 2 minutes. Okay, class, go ahead and turn back up front. I know that sometimes it takes y'all a little while. So turn back up front. Let's check our answers to these 3. Make sure we're all on the same page. We'll check them quickly. Ready, set. Here are our answers. There is a 0% chance of homozygous dominant. I know that because none of the 4 boxes have the homozygous dominant genotype. I don't see any boxes that are uppercase A, uppercase A. The second question, there's a 50% chance of heterozygous. That's because these top 2 boxes that I'm circling are both heterozygous. 2 of 4 boxes, 50%. The final one is that there is a 50% chance of homozygous recessive. It's because these bottom 2 boxes fit the genotype. That's how we can tell the probability of things from Punnett squares. Now, go ahead and go back to your groups. Another 2 minutes. What's the probability of a purple offspring flower? It's the probability of a white offspring flower. Think about how the genotype would lead to the phenotypes to determine your answers. Ready, set, go back to your groups. Okay, bring it back. Look up front. Stop talking to your neighbor. Check your answers. Well, let's see. There's a 50% chance of purple offspring. That's because there are 2 genotypes, the 2 heterozygotes, that will lead to the color purple. The recessive, there's 50%. That's because there's 2 genotypes that are homozygous recessive. That is how we can interpret our Punnett squares. You should have both of those answers down your page. And we are now going to practice this after we check our answers from yesterday. Please keep your packets out, but reopen your computers and let's check our answers to 87, parts 1 and 2. And then we'll switch to practice mode to complete parts 3 and 4. Get out your computer, take a little break, have your computer out by the time these next 2 minutes are up. And then I'll go over the answers from yesterday so you can check and correct or write down answers if you forgot to for 87 parts 1 and 2. Computer's open, 87 open, go. You got 1 more minute to get your computer out, push your notes to the side, and open 87. All right. By now, you should have 87 open and have your computer out. Quiet back down. Let's check part 1, the vocabulary. You just needed to have the letters for this. You didn't have to have the words. I just put the words there for reference because it helps me study a little better. These answers are also in the week 30 slides. So if I move too quickly through these, just reopen the slides to check yourself. So number 1, A, recessive, an allele that's blocked by the presence of a dominant allele. Number 2, C, heredity, the passing of traits from parent to offspring. Number 3, B, chromosomes. Humans receive 23 of these from each parent, 23 from the sperm, 23 from the egg. 4 was D, phenotype, the physical appearance of an organism. 5 was E, homozygous, 2 of the same allele. 6 was H, dominant, an allele that blocks a recessive allele. Number 7 was G, genetics, the study of the passing of traits from parent to offspring. Number 8 was I, genotype, the genetic information, the 2 alleles that control the phenotype of traits, typically shown with letters as shown. And then 9 was F, heterozygous, 2 different alleles. So going straight down, you should have had A, C, B, D, E, H, G, I, F. Please scroll on down to part 2. Part 2 had a short reading to review how genotypes and phenotypes are related. Here are the answers for that. Number 1, purple capital A is dominant to white, lowercase a, and pea plants. True flowers genotype is shown. I'm not going to actually read all this off just because the wording gets a little confusing. Instead, just check your letters. Are your letters right? Check your vocab words. Are they right? Check your phenotype. Is it right? So I'll leave this up for another 2 minutes. Check your answers on part 2. If you have any questions, just mark it for tomorrow and I will answer it on Wednesday. Cool. By now, you should have checked your answers on part 2. The remainder of class time is yours to complete 87. It's due before class tomorrow. You should have enough time if you start promptly right now. Complete parts 3 and 4. In part 3, it's going to have you making and completing Punnett squares. Use your notes if you need some help. Follow the rules, follow the steps. It will take some time to get the hang of, but then as soon as you have it, it's going to be like, wow, this is so easy, Miss Moore. Can we just like learn the next thing already? And then in part 4, you're going to be writing a quick CER based on some Punnett squares about sickle cell to determine if sickle cell follows basic Mendelian inheritance or not. We will go over this tomorrow. You should have your answers done before class. I'm also going to tell you, work on your own with your awesome substitute. You can complete this on your own. Put your headphones in, get to work. Do not drive your substitute crazy because they're a very kind soul for watching the class today on such short notice for me. With that, this video is over. Complete 87. Be respectful. Put your headphones in. Go ahead and get going. If you got any questions, just send me an email and I'll respond as soon as I can. Have a good rest of your Tuesday without me.